"Sweetheart, could you grab me another mimosa?" The glass didn't even clink when he set it down, just the soft thud of assumption. I nodded, lips pressed thin, and turned before my mouth said something my grandmother would have prayed against. The man had a lazy drawl, a Rolex glinting too hard under the chandelier light. He looked right through me, like I was furniture, like I belonged to the wallpaper, but the wallpaper didn't remember blood. The room smelled like money, old oak, white roses, waxed floors, and that perfume rich people wear that smells like nothing but costs everything. The tray in my hands felt heavier now, not from the drinks, from the memory. I knew this land, knew it like you know the crease of your own palm. I was raised in the red dust of it, barefoot in summers that hummed with cicadas and grief. The stories lived in the soil, and the soil had never let go of what it saw. "Girl, that picture's not going to refill itself," a voice snapped behind me. I turned slightly, enough to see the woman in blush-pink lace, mother of the bride, apparently. Her nose wrinkled like she smelled something sour. Maybe she did. Truth tends to stink when it finally rises. I gave her a small nod. "Yes, ma'am." Funny. My great-grandfather called every white man sir, and still ended up with rope around his neck. They don't know that part of the land's story, or maybe they do, and they're praying I never say it out loud. I moved down the hall toward the back kitchen, but I paused, just for a second, outside the main parlor. There it was. The photo, hung crooked in a hallway, too narrow for its weight. Sepia, tone. A young black man in uniform, shoulders square, eyes solemn. My grandmother used to cry when she looked at that photo, not because of how he died, but because of how he lived. Brave and soft-spoken and proud of the land he bought when no one thought he could. His name wasn't even under the photo, just local WW2 vet. I stared at it a moment longer than I should have. "He your granddaddy or something?" another server asked, chuckling, shoving a tray toward me with a clatter. I didn't answer. Because yes, actually, he was, and today I was here to take back what they thought they owned, not through anger, not through fire, but through paper, through truth, through quiet, undeniable power. I looked at the photo one last time and whispered, "I got you, Papa Isaiah." Then I picked up the tray and walked back into the room they thought they controlled. The server's hallway was loud with clinks and hisses, ice against metal, steam from industrial dishwashers, the muted roar of gossip that stayed just below. Scandal. But I kept quiet. I didn't need their stories, I had my own, and it was heavier than anything they were carrying. Back in the ballroom, a slow jazz quartet floated notes over white linen tables. Crystals on centerpieces caught the light like diamonds. Fake ones, just like the smiles. The groom's father had just finished telling a story about the old days when he noticed me pouring his wine. He raised an eyebrow. "You folks sure do know how to work," he said, grinning. "Always moving." I didn't blink, just poured. It's strange being reduced to "you folks on land your blood once paid for in full." They didn't know I had the original deed folded in my bag, wrapped in acid-free tissue paper like a relic. Dated 1947, Isaiah Clarke. They didn't know I spent the last 2 years combing county archives, digging through mildew and dust, tracing how that deed was signed over under duress after Papa Isaiah died, mysteriously. No investigation, no justice, just a whisper in the papers. Local vet found hanging near his barn. No suspects. His land was absorbed by the state through back taxes he never owed, and suddenly the Hollins estate was born. This mansion, this wedding venue, this lie. I stepped back from the table just as the bride walked in, all gasps and tulle, and too much makeup. Her blonde curls were pinned just so, the kind of style that took 2 hours and a stylist who'd rather be somewhere else. She twirled for the crowd. "I'm a Hollins now." The room erupted in applause. I smiled softly, Poor thing didn't know her last name was built on stolen soil. A buzz in my earpiece. Celia, Mariah whispered, the coordinator. Judge Henley just pulled into the lot. He's here. I inhaled once. Deep good. He was the final piece. Judge Henley wasn't just a legal observer. He was the one who quietly reopened the estate claim. He'd seen the old map with the disputed fence lines, the forced transfer, the sworn affidavit from a dying neighbor who finally told the truth. I turned toward the back doors, slipped into the corridor. He stood near the kitchen exit in a grey suit, worn briefcase in hand. His mouth curled into something halfway between apology and admiration when he saw me. "Miss Clark," he said, low and steady, "everything's in order. As of 3 p.m., the land title has officially transferred back into your name." My heart didn't race. It slowed. Steady. Heavy. "Thank you," I whispered. He nodded, then added, "They can finish their ceremony. We agreed to serve notice after the event concludes. You wanted to be kind." I did. But kindness didn't mean silence. As I turned to walk back into the hall, I passed a wall lined with gold-framed portraits of the Hollins men, each more smug than the last. None of them wore uniforms. None of them had bled for this country, but they held wine glasses like they held history, with entitlement, not earned legacy. I walked back into the crowd. The band was playing something soft now. Someone was crying happy tears near the cake, and I was about to ruin their perfect day, not with rage, with truth and my name. I walked through that ballroom like I had walked it 100 times before, because I had. As a little girl, barefoot and invisible, watching through the slats of the back fence while they threw garden parties. My grandmother used to clutch her jaw when she saw them laughing over champagne. "Same porch where your Papa Isaiah planted tomatoes," she whispered once. "Now they drink over it, like nothing grew here but their money." Now here I was, tray in hand, uniform pressed, posture straight, not hunched in the dirt. The groom lifted his glass. "To my beautiful wife, Sarah," he beamed, voice smooth with privilege, "and to the legacy we're building here, on this incredible land." Laughter, applause, even a tear or two. I froze that word. Legacy. It hit me harder than a slap. I felt my mouth dry, but I stayed still. "Did you know," the groom's father chimed in, "this land's been in our family for generations?" I turned, slowly. He raised his glass too. "Tough times, long work, but we made it through. Hollins grit." Hollins grit? I looked down at my tray. My hands weren't shaking. That surprised me. Across the room, Judge Henley stood by the doorway, silent, watching, waiting for the cue. I nodded to myself, just once. Then I moved forward, not fast, not dramatic, just steady. One of the bridesmaids giggled, noticing me approach. "You need to refill—" "No," I said softly. "I need a moment." Voices stilled. Only the music played on. The mic was still in the groom's hand. I reached out gently and took it. He looked stunned. The bride blinked, confused. "Wait, what is this?" I stepped up onto the edge of the platform. "My name is Celia Clark," I said, the mic firm in my grip. "I work in legal research. But before anything else, I'm the great-granddaughter of Isaiah Clark, a man who bought this land after returning from World War II, who was lynched not far from this porch, who was buried without honor, while the county quietly transferred this land into someone else's name." The room dropped into a hush. Today, I came back to finish what he couldn't, to reclaim what was taken from him and from us. The groom's father stood up. "Now hold on a minute." I turned to him, gaze even. "I have the original deed. I have court records. And as of 3 o'clock this afternoon, this land, all 47 acres of it, is legally back in my family's name." Gasps! Someone knocked over a champagne flute. This wedding, I continued, was allowed to finish as a courtesy. But the ownership has changed. The legacy you toasted to? It wasn't yours to begin with. The bride was now shaking her head, in disbelief. This isn't real, this isn't... But Judge Henley stepped forward, folder in hand. It's real, he said, his voice cutting clean through the noise. Filed and recorded this morning, effective immediately. I stepped down from the platform, no cheers, no applause, just stunned silence. Because the help? She just became the landlord. Wait, you can't just... The groom's voice cracked, chasing after something that wouldn't return. The silence that followed wasn't the soft, breathless kind. It was the kind that pressed on every wall of the room like a slow cave-in. You must be mistaken, his mother said, standing now, gripping the edge of the table with manicured fingers. This property's been in our name for decades. Illegally, I replied, calm as a still pond. Her eyes twitched. We maintained this estate. My husband built the second wing, we put in the gardens. That gazebo was built over my great-grandfather's well, I said flatly. I didn't yell, didn't cry, didn't flinch. That part of me had been burned off years ago in probate court hallways and records rooms with no air conditioning. Judge Henley approached with slow, deliberate steps. He handed over the file folder to the groom's father. Here's the county ruling. You'll find the court order on page 6, he said. The land was returned based on forged tax documents, coerced signatures, and testimony from a now-deceased witness who confessed to the fraud before passing. You can't take this from us, the bride said, almost to herself. Not today. Not at my wedding. That's when the photographer lowered her camera. The DJ paused the track, and two servers I didn't even know well stepped back from the cake table, whispering to each other with wide eyes. The illusion cracked like fine china. What happens now? The groom finally asked, jaw tight, voice desperate to find a foothold. Judge Henley answered before I could. You may remain until the end of the event. Ms. Clark has granted a grace period out of courtesy. But as of tomorrow morning you are trespassing if you return without her written permission. His mother let out a sound, part gasp, part laugh, all disbelief. You're joking, I turned to her. You made me pour drinks for people who laughed at my bloodline. You watched me clean corners of this house my papa died protecting, and you thought I was just the help. I set the tray down. Turns out, I added, you were working my party. The bride started crying. The groom backed away from the mic like it was on fire. And I just walked. Through the crowd, past the stunned stares, back through the hallway, where my papa's photo hung crooked on the wall. I paused, took it down, and kept walking. I laid the photo gently across the seat of my car, like it was made of breath and memory. He looked so young in it. Barely 20, eyes full of something I couldn't name but carried every day. Not hope exactly, but a kind of soft defiance. I sat for a moment, hand resting on the steering wheel, listening to the wind rustle through the pecan trees. They'd planted hydrangeas over where his barn used to be, called it the Serenity Garden. Nothing serene about stolen land, nothing quiet about ghosts that never left. I looked back toward the house. People were starting to pour out, slowly, uneasily, like the floor was still trembling beneath them. Some clutched their purses tighter. Some stared at me with glassy, dazed eyes. None of them apologized, but I didn't need their apologies. That wasn't why I came. Back inside, I watched as the staff began packing up. The caterers moved with clipped precision. The servers whispered, behind trays. Mariah, the coordinator, approached me near the foyer, her headset still on but dangling by her shoulder now. Her expression was unreadable. You really did it, she said softly. I nodded once. Took 2 years. 27 records requests. and an aunt who finally told me where Papa's deeds were hidden, under floorboards, inside a Bible. She exhaled, looked down, then back up. You want me to clear the rest of the vendors? It's still technically your house now. I let the silence stretch before answering. Let them finish their work, then tell them they don't have to come back. Mariah gave a slow, reverent nod, like I'd just told her a secret too, big to say aloud. Upstairs in what they called the bridal suite, I stood alone. There were blush petals scattered on the vanity. A hair iron still warm. Half a glass of champagne left sweating beside the mirror. I walked to the window. From there I could see the old field where Papa used to grow okra, where they now parked SUVs and Bentleys. I closed my eyes. I could almost hear him singing. Not a hymn, no, something older, something that didn't need a name. When I opened them again, I saw her. The bride. Sarah. She was sitting at the far edge of the lawn, barefoot now, dress bunched around her knees like she didn't care anymore who saw. Her hands were in her lap. She looked like a child. For a moment I felt something, not pity but recognition. She didn't steal the land. She just grew up thinking it was hers. That's how legacies lie, by acting like their inheritance instead of theft. I stepped away from the glass. In the hallway I passed portraits that would soon come down, a hallway they named after themselves, even though their blood never soaked the soil. And at the top of the stairs I found something strange, a dusty brass plaque tucked behind an old chest, faded, nearly invisible. I wiped it with my sleeve. It came. Read, dedicated to Isaiah Clarke, for his service, for his sacrifice. No one had ever mentioned it. No one had polished it. They buried his name behind furniture and shame, but he was still here. And now so was I. By sunrise, the house was quiet. Not empty, just hushed, like it knew something sacred had been disturbed, and now it had to relearn how to breathe. The family hadn't stayed the night. They packed in a panic after the judge served the papers. Sarah was still sobbing when she left, dragging her gown like it weighed more than her pride. Her new husband trailed behind her, shoulders hunched, face pale. The fairy tale had turned feral. Their lawyer tried calling 3 times. I didn't answer. By the time the sky turned lavender over the fields, only one car remained in the driveway. Mine, and the house. The house was mine too. Moved through it like you move through a museum after hours, solemn, careful, listening, room by room, the study first. Their mahogany desk was still stacked with stationery that bore the Hollins name in gold. I flipped one over and scrawled across, the back, return to sender. I opened a drawer and found a key, then another, then a ring of them each tagged. Pool house, cellar, gates. They had run this place like a fortress, like it was something to protect. Funny how nothing felt protected now. In the dining room, I found the ledgers. Neat little columns of bookings, deposits, floral arrangements, and cake vendors, weddings, retreats, corporate brunches, every one of them stacked on land built from blood. I sat at the table where they once dined in silk and laughter, and I flipped the pages slowly, each one an inventory of ignorance. They thought they owned a venue, but they'd been renting comfort on stolen ground. By noon, I stood on the front steps, the same porch where my papa once watched sunsets with dirt under his nails, where they later sipped Chardonnay and talked zoning permits. The sun was warm on my skin, and down the road a car approached, sheriff's department. Right on time. 2 officers stepped out, both black, both older, both with the same expression, quiet reverence like they knew this wasn't just a job. Ms. Clarke, the taller one said, we're here to oversee the property transition. No resistance expected, but protocol and all. I nodded. No problem, officers. Everything's in order. They exchanged glances. Then the second officer stepped closer. "You wouldn't happen to be related to Isaiah Clarke, would you?" I smiled. "Great-granddaughter." His eyes softened. He took off his cap. "My grandfather served with him. Said he was the kind of man who made silence feel strong. Said he bought this land with every dollar he had and planned to leave it better. Then he found it." I swallowed hard. "Then he did," I whispered. The officer nodded slowly. "We're honored to be here today." They walked the perimeter, checked paperwork, logged their visit, then they left. And I was alone again. But this time, not lonely. The wind shifted, and from somewhere deep in the trees I swore I heard him. Not words, just presence, like the land was exhaling for the first time in 70 years. The first thing I did was take off the uniform, not because I was ashamed, but because it was never mine. It belonged to their version of me. The girl who brought napkins and smiled too politely. The woman they thought didn't know what a deed looked like or what probate court even meant. I folded it, placed it on the foyer table, and walked barefoot through the house in a plain white t-shirt and jeans. Free. I wasn't performing anymore. I found the cellar keys, and I knew what I was looking for. Down the steps, the air turned cooler, the silence thicker, the kind of quiet that held memory like breath. Shelves lined with old wine bottles and pickled relics, but behind one crooked shelving unit, there was a sealed door, one they never used, one they probably forgot existed. I forced the lock, bracing my body against the frame until it cracked open with a groan. The room inside was dark, the bulb overhead flickering like it resented being disturbed. But there it was, the original boundary stone red clay packed around it, chisel marks still clear, and beside it a rusted toolbox. I knelt slowly. Inside, wrapped in wax paper, was a map, hand-drawn. Ink faded. Papa's handwriting. Fences. Wells. Oak trees he planted. He had recorded it all. Because he knew. He knew. They would try to erase him, so he documented everything in silence, in roots, in lines they could never see from their porches. That night, I sat at the kitchen table, one light on. The rest of the house dark. Map spread out beside the ledger. Judge Henley had emailed me a list of potential restitution options. He offered to connect me to a journalist, said a story like this might catch fire. I hadn't decided yet. This wasn't about fire, it was about dignity, about ghosts who never got to finish their sentences. At dawn I stood in the field, shoes wet with dew. I marked where Papa's okra used to grow, where the barn once stood, where he used to whistle while he worked. Before the men in that truck came and didn't leave without taking something they didn't earn, I took a shovel and drove it into the dirt, not to dig, to plant. Something new, because when they buried him in silence, they thought that meant his. Story ended, but seeds don't die in silence, they wait. And this land, this soil it always remembered. It took 3 months to undo 70 years of lies. First came the furniture, all hauled out. I donated the antiques to a local museum with one condition. Every plaque must tell the truth, not the Hollins version. Mine. Then came the name. The property was no longer listed as the Hollins Estate. I renamed it Clarke Ground, not Clarke Manor, not Clarke Acres. Ground. Because that's what my great-grandfather fought for. Because ground is where roots live, where blood sinks in, where history buries itself and waits to bloom. The first event I hosted wasn't a wedding, it was a remembrance, no RSVP, no seating chart, no white tablecloths, just folding chairs, neighbors, old families from the other side of the tracks, veterans and elders who remembered Isaiah Clarke not as a statistic, but as a man who brought in harvests and taught Sunday school in the Irish same boots. We lit candles around the pecan trees, told stories the newspapers never printed, An old woman in a lavender shawl stood up and said, "He gave my mama eggs when she had nothing but rice." Another man added, "He fixed our fence before his own." A boy no older than 12 read his poem called What the Dirt Told Me, and I cried. Not out of grief, out of fullness, out of knowing that the silence my grandfather left behind had finally been answered. Weeks later, I opened an office on the property. Nothing flashy. Just a room with open windows, worn bookshelves and case files stacked high, names of black landowners whose deeds went missing. They call it restorative title work. But to me it's resurrection. Every document I recover, every boundary I redraw feels like setting a ghost free, like brushing dust off dignity, like telling someone, "You were never crazy. They really did take it from you." One afternoon, I walked the edge of the property line and found Sarah there, the bride, no veil, no makeup. Just jeans and a wrinkled college t-shirt. She held a box. Inside, a faded guest book, one of her family's old ledgers, and a letter. "I found these in my parents' attic," she said, eyes lowered. "I think they're yours." I nodded. Took the box. She hesitated before walking away, then stopped and asked, "Does it feel better now?" I looked out over the field, where the okra had started to push green again through the red clay. "It doesn't feel better," I said. "It feels right." And that was enough. I didn't need revenge. I needed restoration. I needed the land to know that someone came back for it, not with a torch, but with a name. And that name still echoes here, in every wind that shakes the trees, in every photograph. We finally hang with pride, in every story that starts not with once upon a time, but with we got it back.